Chapter 17, Selling. Laura took 8 copies of her new comic book home from Greg's on Sunday night. She gave one to her mom, one to her dad, and one to her big brother Tommy. Everyone was impressed. "Maura," her mother said, "this is amazing! Of course, I always knew you had art talent, but this is a wonderful little book, like a fairy tale. And I love unicorns, don't you? I mean, of course you do, because here's the book, and who made it? You did! My Maura is an author! This is amazing!" Maura thought so too, and that's why she autographed one copy and tucked it into the zippered pocket of her backpack. And on Monday morning, when she went to meet her friend Allison on the way to the bus stop, she gave it to her. Allison sat right down on her front steps and read it. And when Allison was done reading, she said, "This is so good." Maura beamed and said, "Thanks." As the bus came around the corner, Maura said, "You better leave that at home. Just stick it in your mailbox or something." But Allison said, "It's okay. I won't show it to anybody, promise." She slipped it inside the front cover of her social studies book, and then they both ran and got on the bus. Maura watched Allison's face as she'd read the story and looked at the pictures. And, sitting on the bus, she started counting kids. There were 47 students on the bus by the time they got to school. And Maura found herself thinking a little bit like Greg, because she felt sure that she could have sold every single boy and girl on the bus a copy of her new comic book. She could have been well on her way toward being a recognized artist and author, except it wasn't allowed. As usual, Mrs. Davenport had been very efficient. She had prepared a written version of the all-school announcement she had made on Friday. She had made it shorter, more to the point, and it was printed up in large type. And by Monday morning, a copy was hanging on every bulletin board in every hallway and every classroom at Ashworth Intermediate School. Announcement. Some of our students have been making small comic books and then bringing them to school and selling them to their friends. This is not permitted. Our town school committee has a strict policy about what may and may not be sold at school. Starting right now, these little comic books may not be brought to school, they may not be created at school, and they certainly may not be sold at school. Thank you all for your cooperation. Mrs. Davenport, Principal. Sitting in social studies, Maura stared at a copy of the announcement. She read it, then she read it again. And one sentence stood out to her. Our town school committee has a strict policy about what may and may not be sold at school. May and may not. So that meant some things were okay to sell at school, and some things were not. And the school committee got to choose? Interesting. In her mind, Maura began arguing with the school committee, imagining what she would say to those people. Because really, what was wrong with selling their comics to other kids? Nothing, or at least nothing she could see. Certainly not with her little comic book, or Greg's either. And sitting there thinking in Mrs. Sanborn's class, Maura happened to look over and notice the front of Brittany's social studies book. Except she couldn't actually see the World Cultures book. On the first day of school, Mrs. Sanborn had required that all the kids tape covers onto their new books. And the glossy book covers Mrs. Sanborn had handed out were loaded with pictures of high school athletes wearing Nike shorts and Nike shoes and Nike shirts and Nike shorts and hats and warm-ups. And Maura realized that every social studies book in the classroom was trying to sell her something. And she thought, I guess the school committee decided that was okay. Then in the gym, a couple periods later, Maura saw posters about a fundraiser for new uniforms for the soccer and basketball teams. They weren't posters kids had made. These posters were large, bright, printed posters, and everyone showed beautiful, full-color pictures of M&Ms, Three Musketeer bars, and Skittles. So someone must have decided that it was okay to buy and sell candy at school. Outside during gym, Maura took a good look at the new scoreboard on the soccer field. It was all red and white. And it was trying to sell her a Coke. Next to the door on the way back inside, a big black and blue machine was trying to sell her a bottle of sports drink. And in the cafeteria, At lunchtime, a long banner was selling pizza because it was Domino's Pizza Day, and over in the corner, a machine was selling frosty cans of juice. Seeing all this got Maura thinking. But then during 7th period language arts class, something happened that got Maura really excited. And when she saw Greg in the hall, right after school, she ran up, grabbed him by the arm, and blurted out, "Did Mrs. Lindahl pass out something in your language arts class today?" Greg looked at Maura as if she'd escaped from a zoo. He shook his head, and Maura said, "No. Well, look at what Mrs. Pelham had passed out last period, to every kid in the room. Here." Greg took the paper she held out. He looked at the front, flipped it over, and looked at the back cover, then turned a page and said, "Yeah, so what?" Maura looked at him, disgusted. "So what? Don't you get it? Think about what Mrs. Davenport said, about selling stuff at school, about selling comic books. Now look again." Greg looked again, and this time he got it, because what Greg held in his hands was the new flyer from the book club, a full-color 8-page advertisement. The ad was selling books, more than 75 different titles. There were classics and there were Newbery Award winners, but there were also Garfield and X-Men books, and Scooby-Doo cartoon books, and Calvin and Hobbes collections. There were magic trick books, drawing books, and even books that came with toys, like bobblehead keychains and little silver necklaces. This book club flyer was like all the other ones Greg had looked at once a month ever since 1st grade, because once a month the teachers handed out the flyers, and then the kids placed their orders, and then the teachers collected the money. And where did all that buying and selling happen? At school.